Okay, so we've hit 10. So we'll get started. People may still be joining as we start, but that's okay. So first of all, welcome to Social Work Week. If this is your first one of the week, or your first Social Work Week session in general. So yeah, welcome to this session on the voice of lived experience in social work practice. So every year we have a session hosted by our National Advisory Forum. And it's always one of the good ones. So if this is one of the only ones that you've got to this week, you've picked a good one. So we're really pleased that you're with us today and hope you're able to take something away from the session. So before we get into it and I hand over to our presenters, I'll just quickly run through some of our standard housekeeping slides. So just here, a brief legal disclaimer that any views, informations or opinions expressed by third parties do not necessarily represent the views of Social Work England or its employees. So just a bit of a disclaimer there. Moving on. So just a brief privacy notice. So just a note that providing your personal information when you signed up to the event will be just used for the purpose of event management and evaluation. You'll be sent a feedback form after the week. Yeah, really keen to hear your feedback that you have either for this session or the week in general, as and when that makes its way to you. And you can view our company-wide data retention schedule on the link that's on that slide here if you need to. I'll hand over to our panel who will introduce themselves and get started on the session. Thanks, everyone.
Morning, everyone. Thank you for making time to attend the session today. I think we might need the next slide. But this session is going to be on the voice of lived experience in social work practice. To give you a bit of context, you probably heard us mention the National Advisory Forum, a bit about who we are and what we're made up of. The National Advisory Forum is a mix of people. We use two terms, people with lived experience and learned experience, and we actually have a slide on that later, so don't want to spoil it for you. But effectively, the National Advisory Forum is made up of social workers, students, people with a lived experience of social work, so whether that's fostering, accessing adult social care, support with physical, emotional needs. There's a full range of people that have accessed social work in different ways and delivered social work in different ways. My name is Ashley, and I am somebody with a lived experience of social work, children's social care specifically. I'm somebody care experienced, and I was fostered. So that is the lived experience that I bring to the forum. I have a little bit of learned experience as well because I do some work in children's social care. But yeah, that's me. Should we go on to next? Iffy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Iffy Wakaro. I'm one of the lived experience members of the National Advisory Forum. Have been for gone over 2 years now. I'm on here through my expertise, my expert by experience from having a spinal cord injury for the last 14 years. I do a lot of work with higher education providers and with the local council here at Teesside in Middlesbrough.
So I'm Gareth. I'm a member of the National Advisory Forum as well as a person with lived experience. I've had several social care pathways in my past across physical and mental health when I was a teen, in my 20s and my 40s. I won't say what age I am now. And so I bring that lived experience lens to the committee. And I've got learned experience as well, having worked with social workers in the past in my career. And I also work as a social work educator with a university group delivering social work courses alongside academics and others. So enjoy today. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Carrie.
Hi, my name's Carrie Blackwood. I am a social worker in Sheffield in kinship team, and I also have a little bit of lived experience of children's social work as well.
Thank you, Heather.
Hi everyone, so my name is Heather. I have learned experience, so my background is I'm an adult mental health social worker, also working in substance use. I also work as a approved mental health professional in AMP, and I'm currently the social work lead for an adult mental health directorate at NHS Trust.
Amazing, thank you. And if you want to read about the other members of our forum, who you can see on the pictures there is information on the Social Work England website. There is a page dedicated to the work that the National Advisory Forum do and how they're involved, and explaining the makeup of the forum. So I definitely urge you to have a look if you're interested in who's in the forum. So this session is about amplifying the voices of lived experience in social work practice. But really, I guess it can be very relatable to everyone in a broad sense. So I want you to take to kind of center yourself and think about a time where you have felt excluded from decisions that affect you. And when we were thinking about this really broadly, I guess some of the examples that we thought of were sometimes you might have an appointment with the GP and you might feel like they're not really listening to your voice. In COVID, lots of people felt like they didn't have as much of a voice in decisions that they would have hoped to. There's maybe at work, you could be at work and feel not very listened to or not very advocated for. There's a broad range of experiences that aren't necessarily to do with social work, where it can feel like there's a bit of difficulty in having your voice heard. So just want you to take a second and think about a time where you've ever felt that sense of frustration or disappointment that your voice hasn't been as amplified as you wished that it was. Thank you.
So we thought it would be helpful to frame the session thinking about the international global definition of social work. So I'm sure in this session there's lots of people from a variety of backgrounds. So we know that we have social workers in local authority statutory settings, NHS settings, charity, third sector, and we have lots of those social workers that make up our National Advisory Forum as well. So we know that social work is diverse. It's in a variety of places. It's also growing in corporate, but we know it's everywhere, and it absolutely should be because it's a brilliant profession. But we know it's incredibly diverse, and it's incredibly has lots of job titles, job roles, job descriptions, job responsibilities. It's all very, very different. So we thought it would be helpful to frame this session when we're actually thinking about amplifying the voices of people of lived experience with the global definition of social work, which I will go to in a minute. But I just wanted to share, if I can, a little bit of my career journey. So I started off in a local authority social care statutory adult mental health team. So as part of my role, I completed Care Act assessments, I commissioned, I reviewed, I completed Section 42 inquiries and investigations, capacity assessments, best interest decisions, court protection. I'm sure that's sounding really familiar to some of you. And then I moved into the NHS. And I had a real identity crisis about what social work was and who was I as a social worker and actually what it was all about. In my NHS trust, social work is very much in its infancy, which brings a lot of challenges, but it's also incredibly exciting, really thinking about the core of social work and the heart of it and the crux and actually what is the benefit of social work. And for us at my organisation and for me in my own practice, and what I do as a social work lead, this international definition has been so important. And it's really important when we're thinking about amplifying the voices of people with lived experience as well. So the definition is, and I'll pop it in the chat when that I can as well with a link to it, but the definition is social work is a practice-based profession and an academic discipline that promotes social change and development, social cohesion, collective responsibility, and respect for diversity is central to social work. It's underpinned by theories of social work, social sciences, humanities, and Indigenous knowledge. Social work engages peoples and structures to address life challenges and enhance well-being. So I love this definition because I think sometimes we fall into our roles, our responsibilities, and that's what we then decide that social work is about. And we lose those really important values and principles, including amplifying the voices of people with lived experience. And actually what this definition does is it brings us back to the core principles, which essentially, that's a long definition, but what it actually means is it's about promoting social change, social development, cohesion, and the empowerment and liberation of people. The principles are about respect for inherent worth and dignity, and it's about people doing no harm, respect for diversity, and upholding human rights and social justice, which essentially is what we're all about and what we're all here. So what's been really helpful having this collective understanding of social work is that actually it's got us past the job roles, the job descriptions, all those everyday stuff, and it's got us back to thinking in my organisation about what social work is actually about and having a shared understanding with colleagues, but also with people who have lived experience and are using services as well. So throughout this session, I really want you to think about that when we're talking about amplifying the voices of people with lived experience rather than your everyday kind of responsibilities and duties. And then moving on to otherness. So the concept of otherness describes basically how a minority and less powerful group are positioned as inferior to dominant groups. So essentially that them and us, with us being professional social workers and them being people with lived experience who access services and have a social worker. And this is a huge barrier to amplifying voices of people with lived experience. It's really not helpful, but it happens because of lots of reasons. But it happens within direct work, it happens within processes, and it happens within organisations. And it's something to be really, really mindful of because it just doesn't help. So enjoy the session today, but what I would ask is that you hold on to that international definition, you challenge yourself about otherness, and that you learn and share.
Okay, so I'm moving on to, this has been mentioned in the introduction about learned and lived experience, and I just want to expand upon that a little bit further. So learned experience is primarily the knowledge and expertise gained through studying, delivering or working in the field of social work. And that's an important aspect. Lived experience is knowledge, expertise gained through experiencing, using, receiving something or outputs of a service. So what's been said before is that within the National Advisory Forum, for example, we have a range of people with lived and learned experience, but also people with lived and learned experience as a mix from their background. For me, as someone who has been a recipient of services and been a service user in terms of having a social worker allocated to me in the past, that experience has been very powerful, and it gives me an insight as an expert by experience that I bring to the National Advisory Forum. And I think the learned experience is really important, and I work with the university group, starting off with social workers of the future as students and trying to embed with them the learning, the core learning of what it is to be a social worker. And the reality is that both elements are very important and both bring a lot of power to discussions, to practice, and to delivery of services. Can I have the next bit of the slide, please? But there is a lot of intersection, and also whether or not we feel that we have lived or learned experience, we usually have some form of one or both. And throughout life, it may not be us directly ourselves who are availing of services or needing to have a social care pathway, but we may have a relative, a peer, a colleague, a neighbour, a family member who is experiencing issues that requires social worker intervention. So we will have some experience, lived experience at some point in our lives, usually through that pathway. Okay, next slide, please. So Social Work England have a range of standards, professional standards that they set up as a regulator, and these these standards are in place to ensure that there is a framework for social workers to work to, because social workers have to register. It's a registered and regulated profession, and they have to adhere to these standards and uphold these standards in practice to ensure the best possible delivery for the people they work with, and for continual development, continual professional development, and safeguarding of the public. So just go through this very, very briefly. Before I do, just to say that there are two things. One is, as a person who's been a recipient of work with social workers as a service user, although my pathways predate these standards, I think the ethos and core values that are embedded now through the standards have always been embedded in the profession in different ways. By having standards clearly defined, it brings it into focus more clearly. So in these professional standards, 1.1 is to value each person as an individual, recognizing their strengths and abilities. 1.2 is respect and promote human rights, views, wishes and feelings of people I work with, balancing rights and risks, and enabling access to advice, advocacy, support and services. 1.3 is working in partnership with people to promote their well-being and achieve best outcomes, recognizing them as experts in their own lives. And 2.5 is actively listen to understand people, using a range of appropriate communication methods to build relationships. Now, these are all core and really important. And for me, that is part of the reason I got involved with social work England, is because these standards are so important for the profession and about what people should expect when they have a social worker working with them. It's important for teams of social workers, local authorities and independent settings and other settings for social workers, so that wherever social work is working in whatever capacity, with whatever community and whatever area of expertise, these standards are embedded across the profession in every way, so that anybody accessing services can be, as much as possible, clear that they will get a good service. And lastly, what I want to say is, in terms of my work with one of the university groups, and as a social work educator within that, as an expert by experience with my lived experience, is that when I'm working with students, it's a privilege and it's a pleasure. But by having these standards, this is the core tenet to any part of learning that I go through with them at any stage in their course, whatever course they're doing. And it's about embedding these standards into the psyche and the pre-practice for people before they go on placement and before they finish their courses, so that it's already there as a given and as a tangible way of working before they go into live practice. And I and my peers within the university who have lived experience are always reiterating social working standards and other standards and frameworks from partner organizations to ensure that we can raise and bring forward the best possible social workers of the future. But also for those in practice, no matter how long you've been in practice, by adhering to these professional standards, one, you keep on top of your profession and it just reinforces why you're doing it, but also it ensures that there is consistency, professionalism, and quality of service to give confidence to people they work with and the public, and therefore safeguard and support them the best way possible. So professional standards may seem a bit of a yawn, all these standards and policies and procedures, but actually, if we didn't have them, we would have a lot more sort of disjointed services. By having standards, people can work very clearly to a set of principles, and those principles come out very clearly in how they work with individuals and how they get the best outcomes for their situation.
Hi everyone. In the next part of the presentation, we've got a pre-recording, so I'm not going to talk too much to kind of bring it in because we talk about it in the recording as well. But this was a great opportunity to kind of link this whole conversation into the impacts of having lived experience as a professional impacts your own practice, and what that kind of means more broadly. And I'm sure some of you watching, if you're social workers, and have some lived experience of your own, you might be able to relate to some of these themes and some of the worries that we had, even just having these discussions. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it.
Hi everyone, and welcome and thank you for joining us for this conversation as part of the National Advisory Forum led session at Social Work Week 2024. So we'll be having a bit of a conversation on the voice of lived experience in social work from social workers with lived experience. So we'll introduce those members who are speaking in just a second, just after I introduce myself. So firstly, I'm Jack Harrison. I'm the Participation Officer at Social Work England, and I'm responsible for co-production and the management of our National Advisory Forum. So if I come to each of you in turn and just ask you to introduce yourselves first, and then we'll dive into the questions. So Carrie, if you want to go first.
Hi everyone, my name's Carrie Blackwood. I'm a social worker in Sheffield, and I'm in a kinship care team.
Thanks, Carrie. And from yourself, Kira?
I'm Kira Walsh. I'm a student social worker at Solent, and I'm care experienced.
Perfect, thank you. So we'll come back to you, Carrie, for the first question. So did your experience of social work impact your journey to becoming a social worker?
I think most people would say yes. I'd be surprised if people said no to this one. Yes, I didn't want to be a social worker because I thought they were rubbish and terrible based on my own experiences. I remember the first time I had social workers involved, I didn't realise they were social workers until I'd got my my records back, because if you've had social workers involved, you can always request your records. And I didn't realise that's who they were. I can remember people coming out and asking me what I got for Christmas. And I remember being really excited to tell them about this zebra teddy that I'd got, but that's kind of all I remember about that. I don't remember them saying who they were. They were just people that had come to speak to me. I do remember the second time I had social workers involved when I was a teenager, and I was much more aware of obviously exactly what was going on because I'd said, oh, I need some help with this. And I remember being really disappointed that when they came to visit, they didn't speak to me on my own. And just that they didn't speak to me on my own was just burned in my brain. And I thought, wow, social workers are really rubbish, and I would never want to do that. So when I did my undergrad degree, I was really interested in learning disabilities, and that's what I wanted to do. And that's kind of how I got into social work. And I was really clear when I started my social work masters, don't want a children's placement. I've got no interest in it. Don't want to do it at all. And then my first placement was in children's, of course, because the idea is that they give you your first placement that is something that you're not going to go into after you qualify. And I don't really know how it was that it happened because I really struggled on my first placement, but I decided at the end of that placement that children's was for me, and I was going to be everything that I didn't have, or I felt like I didn't have when I was a kid. And I think it made me realize that actually I can be at least better than that. And I can give what I, would consider the bare minimum, speaking to kids on their own, giving them a voice. And then second placement ended up in children's again. And then it just kind of reaffirmed everything that I thought in first placement, that actually this is something that I really want to do. And I want people to have better than what I felt I did. So maybe not the most, I don't know, inspiring way to get into social work, because it was a definite no to a, oh my gosh, yes, I definitely want to do this. But yeah, it massively impacted my journey.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think I'll politely disagree with the inspiring aspect of that. And yeah, I think what really stood out was that really clear impact of the not having your voice listened to, and the lasting impact that had on you. So thank you for that. Kira, do you want to answer that same question as well?
Yeah, so I think like Harry, I hadn't even considered social work. It wasn't on my radar. I was going to be a teacher or a journalist, and that was that. But I had social workers from when I was 4 upwards. And really similar again, I didn't particularly like them when I had them. I didn't think they were listening to me. I thought they blamed me for everything, and that was a really big thing. Even if I'd done something wrong or I had an attitude, I felt like I was being blamed for that, and it was a me problem. But a lot of that wasn't because I was in care or because I was a bad child. I was just 15, but it felt almost like because I had a social worker, that became a personality issue rather than actually I'm just being normal. And I kind of learned quite quickly that there is a difference. Like when you have a social worker, you're treated really, really differently to when you don't. That bothered me quite a lot. Didn't really like them. Like, it continued for a really long time. Didn't think I was being listened to, and because I didn't feel like I was being listened to, my recovery took a really, really long time. But when I was probably 15, 16, maybe 17, can't remember, every year turns into like all the same, doesn't it? I had a social worker who self-disclosed that she was care experienced. And it meant like things like my first flat was magnolia, and I was like, is it yellow, is it cream, what's it trying to be? And I wanted to paint it, and she spent her Sunday painting it. Because obviously that really mattered to me. Like having my own key, she got me a key ring because that really mattered to me. I didn't have that before. So I think I had this really bad experience, and then I learned that having this lived experience wasn't a negative, like it wasn't a downfall. I wasn't being judged for it, but it meant that she understood what I was saying more than social workers I had previously did. So I applied thinking that I'd get rejected prior to interview, and I thought that because on UCAS you tick a care leaver box, and I thought, God, if I tick this care leaver box, that's automatic rejection. Like that is that. Like I'm not getting anywhere with this. Should have applied for teaching, but I got offers everywhere I applied. So that's why I went into social work, because I had really bad experiences and I worked out how they affected me, but I also had this one really, really good experience. And that was enough to, I suppose, change my mind from teaching.
Yeah, and I think it's been a good thing for the social work profession that happened in those ways, and that you've made that decision and you're on that journey to becoming a social worker. And yeah, and I think there was some similarities reflected between yours and Carrie's there, of that really early experience of that not being listened to, that really stayed with. So yeah, thanks for sharing that with us. So Carrie, if we come back to you, how has your lived experience had an impact on your practice or how you work with people?
I feel like it impacts everything that I do, because I think of it in two ways. I think this young person or this child or these children, however many there are, they could be reading these exact words that I'm typing now. Because when I got my records back, I had more questions after I got my records back than answers. And so many of things were blacked out because it was obviously to do with someone else and I couldn't read it because of confidentiality. But then the other things, I was almost a little bit offended by in how I was described or spoken about and how dismissive some of the ways of wording was. I also think it doesn't help that when they were involved when I was really little, none of it was typed, it was all on writing. So trying to decipher people's handwriting was also really, really difficult. And there were some things that I just thought, I don't really know what this is trying to say, so I'll just ignore it. So whenever I'm doing case recordings now, I always have it in mind of what are they going to think when they read this later, and also what are they going to want from this, because obviously we have our own agenda as social workers and things that we need to do for the assessment, for plans and for actions, but actually what are the things that matter to those young people as well. So I mean, for me, it was the context of what my family was doing, if there was anybody else that was bothered, because that really stuck to me. I didn't really get the sense that anybody else was really that bothered or that involved. So I try and use that whenever I'm doing case recordings. And then it's the voice as well for me. And I always try and make sure that when I'm speaking to young people, that even if I can't do what they're asking me to do, I still let them know that I've heard them and what's going to happen with their voice, even if I can't action it. Because I think I would have really appreciated someone to just say to me, I hear you and I understand these are all the things that you're worried about and that are really upsetting for you now, but actually we can't do the thing that you want us to do. So I guess it just all boils down to the voice and what I think is important. But I suppose I worry sometimes that I'm putting too much of my experiences and what I think on what people might want to read in their case notes, for example, and like, you know, the voice is really important, but lots of other things are really important as well. But I suppose to me, I'm always like the voice and the case recordings, they're like my two things that are really propelled by obviously my own experiences. But then there's always that kind of worry that you're putting too much of your own experiences into, you know, what you're doing. Like for example as well, like I've never said to any of my families, oh, I've had social workers involved as well, because I think it's still quite a stigmatized thing and quite taboo. Although I think it's getting much better now, I think it's still a slow progress in, you know, in people coming forward and saying, yeah, I've had social workers involved too, and it not being, you know, made a massive deal out of. It's just part of someone's experience. So yeah, it definitely impacts every single day. Every time I write a case note, I always think about it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Carrie. And although I can see why it's something that you might go backwards and forwards and grapple with a bit, I don't think having someone's voice or someone's perception of what's happening, I don't think you can focus on that too much or have that too much of the heart of what you do. So yeah, I think there's some reassurance in that. Kira, the same question to you.
So I've just started the 4th week of my first placement, so all of this is very new to me.
Yeah.
But I think some things that I have thought about are how much empathy I have in comparison to professionals that maybe aren't or haven't got lived experience. And because there is a difference there, you do sit and wonder, okay, am I using my lived experience too much as a professional? Then you wonder about all of this like professional boundary stuff, like somebody self-disclosed to me, but could I do that, or would I have my professionalism questioned? Like it's stuff like this that I really worry about. Because you don't want someone to just turn around and I suppose question you as a professional because you've got lived experience. So that's something I found particularly difficult in the last few weeks, just because things have happened and I have empathized more, and I've even questioned myself, thinking, do I feel this way because this is my first placement and this is new, or do I feel this way because I've got lived experience and I'm being abnormal? Like you just don't know, but you do think about how your lived experiences affecting your practice really, really regularly. And I don't think so much because you need to or because you need to second guess yourself, but like Carrie said, because it is still stigmatized. Even if the stigma is causing you to like internally do it to yourself, that does affect every move, every conversation, like even if you're not actively thinking it. I think also in terms of how I speak to people, the words I use, what I write in a daily log, like all of these different things, because I sit and I go, would I want somebody to talk to me like this right now? Is that really condescending? Is that really actually just straight up unkind? And do I want to be perceived like that? No. Again, though, that's really subjective. I'm working in an adult placement. I want to work with children, so they're obviously quite different, but I don't really know. So yeah, I do think about it quite a lot. I think the things it affects for me at the moment, being in my first placement, are things like levels of empathy and like internal stigma, I suppose, because you know that you've got that stigma coming from both directions. Like you've got the stigma because you're a social work student or a social worker, and you've got the stigma because you're a care leaver. So you've got it coming from both directions, and then you're trying to be like a professional in the middle of it, which means that you never really know whether what you're doing is right or wrong, because you don't know, is that me with my lived experience brain on, or is that me with my professional one, or are they interlinked? So I think probably empathy, how I speak to people, and then that like internal stigma.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kira. And I think although it sounds like that there's a lot to navigate and work through there, I think the reflective approach that you have to that, to thinking about your own actions and the impacts of them, I think is a really good thing, and will stand you in really good stead for that going forward as well.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, go ahead, sorry.
No, I just said thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. So Carrie, if we come back to you for the last question, and that's whether your experience of social work has impacted on your professional identity or the development of your professional identity.
I would say yes, but I think that's something that's more happened recently. I think when I first started, certainly when I was a student, and I think for the first couple of years after, I think I felt like there was such a stigma to saying, yes, I've had social workers, because it automatically, it kind of gives off the impression that, oh, well, you know, there's something wrong with your family or there's something wrong with you. I'm not saying any of these things are true. I think it's just how I felt about it. And I think part of it was, well, I want to protect these people who are still involved in my life, and I don't want to make things worse for them. I've had experiences before where, you know, service users have tried to find me, like on social media or whatever, and I just think I don't want to open that up to, you know, my own family. So I guess that was hesitancy, but definitely just the stigma and of what it says about you, and people will make those assumptions, and are they going to think, oh, well, I can see why, because, you know, you're such a troublemaker, or, you know, all those kind of things. So like even doing it in this kind of space is a little bit nerve-wracking, because you can't take it back. Like we're in this space now, these things are being said. If it goes up on YouTube as well, like you can't take these things back. So I think even just doing this has been a big step, because it's kind of acknowledging that, and hopefully it'll help people realize that actually it is okay, and the only way that it's going to seem less stigmatized is if more people speak about it. Because I'd much prefer it to just to be an open conversation in the office of, you know, people talking about previous experiences, and then if they feel like they can say, well, you know, when I had social care, I had this experience, or I would like to do this differently. So I can definitely see it continuing to shape me more. And that's definitely been more the case, even in just like the last few months. And certainly that's been brought out, I would say, by being in the National Advisory Forum. I think I'd said when I first joined, I was going to sneak in some of my lived experience. And equally, like, I haven't been in care. I haven't had loads and loads of social care involvement. But the social care involvement that I have had has been definitely an interesting experience that I don't think I'm ever going to forget about. But yeah, I just want that stigma to kind of be reduced, to, I guess, aid in the transition of people like really accepting their whole professional identity. But it's going to be a long process, I think. But this is a good start.
Yeah, it is, and really appreciate the steps that you've taken in participating in this, and just wanted to really acknowledge that and thank you for it. So yeah, thank you. Kira, if you want to speak to the same question.
Yeah, so I think as a student, what I found particularly difficult is I'm 22, which means that I still sit under a leaving care team, but I'm also a student social worker. And because I come from somewhere really, really small, there's this, it's like changing your narrative or your title from care leaver to student social worker to social worker, and hoping to get a job at the end of it. And not really knowing if you will or not, but crossing your fingers and hoping that you will. I think I, like Harry, initially, like when I was in sixth form, you best believe nobody would have known where I was going home to. Like it just would not have happened. I think now I started this because obviously I did have a social worker who disclosed that she was care experienced. I went into this thinking I wouldn't bother, like I wouldn't have an issue telling anyone if my parents were divorced and I was going between houses at the weekend. So I don't particularly have an issue telling them that I lived elsewhere. And if that I'm questioned. And I thought if that affects me professionally, that affects me professionally. If it doesn't, great. But yeah, but I don't think I'd have the confidence to do that had I not had a social worker that was care experienced, because like Harry said, that there is this stigma, and that is terrifying, particularly if you've not seen anybody go against the stigma, say they are care experienced, and it be a really positive thing.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Kira. And I think credit to that social worker who did work with you and who did disclose that and who did have that impact on you. And I guess even this conversation that we're having today is building on the work that they did in that space. So credit to them. So yeah, that if we start to wrap up, it'd be good to hear any, just looking back on the conversations that we've had, any final thoughts or reflections on, I guess either what you're taking away from this or what you would like other people to take away from this that have listened to it. Carrie, if we start with you.
I think if nothing else, have confidence and bravery to, I guess, disclose a little bit of yourself if you have had social care involvement, or if you are care experienced. And I think if we can start having those conversations, it'll just be easier for other people to say those things. And hopefully we'll get to a point where it's not something that people are hesitant about for the wrong reasons. I mean, obviously there are going to be things that people don't want to share and things that need to be kept private. But I think it will be helpful just in this space because there's so much knowledge and experience that we can take from other people who have had social care experience and other people's experiences. And I think it would just be a shame to lose all of that, because it builds a really skilled worker and someone who's got a lot of empathy and understands what other people are going through. So I guess it's just to start having a few more of these conversations if you feel brave enough.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Carrie. And from yourself, Kira?
Yeah, I think I'd say the same. Like, lived experience professionals are professionals. Ultimately, we've done the same degree. We've got the same learned knowledge. We just have knowledge that you can't just go out and learn. So if anything, that's an addition, right? And then I'd say, like, have some confidence. I suppose for young people, I'd say, like, the house in which you grew up, wherever that may be, whatever address that may be, does not mean nothing when you want to do something you want to do. So I suppose I'd say that there is stigma. Of course there is, and we'd be naive to say that there isn't, but that doesn't mean that you can't be absolutely terrified and do it anyway.
Yeah, there's a quote I think that's the only time that you can be brave is when you're scared. So yeah, I think I've took that away from what you've said there, Kira. And I just want to thank you both for taking part in what can be a really daunting, but what is a really important conversation. And hopefully it's been helpful, enlightening to others in the profession who maybe have shared similar experiences to yours, or maybe have had similar questions, or to other professionals and the sector more widely who haven't, who might be maybe only considering or hearing about some of this for the first time. And I think as you've both alluded to as well, the lines between lived and learned experience are often blurred, whether or not it's acknowledged or however that is thought of. But we'll all be service users at some stage in our lives, whether that's prior to our professional lives or during or afterwards. So it's all part of the human experience and of life, and there shouldn't be stigma attached to it. And I think this conversation has been one step towards breaking that down a little bit, which I think can only be a good thing. So thank you both for taking part in it, and thanks for everyone who's watched or watching, and enjoy the rest of the session.
So moving on from talking about lived experience, I wanted to talk a little bit about how voices have really impacted things in my professional practice as well. So I'm obviously in Sheffield, and I wanted to talk about some of the ways that we have used voices of the children that we work with in the profession now. So in Sheffield Children's Social Care, specifically for children who are classed as looked after by the local authority, we've conducted what we've called the Bright Spot survey. So the survey was open to all the children who were classed as looked after in Sheffield to give them a voice on what they felt was important for their social worker to know and ask them about when they were out on visits, during meetings, and just every aspect of social care involvement. And the results of that survey have directly impacted social work practice in Sheffield. So one of the examples of that is foster carers now, and it's part of their mandatory training, they're required to play the placement game. So the placement game has been made by children who are looked after, and it explores their life and their challenges that have impacted their lives. It's a bit like snakes and ladders, and some of the snakes will be the placement breaks down or contact is difficult, and it really just highlights the things that they have gone through. And it's much more meaningful and impactful as training because it's delivered by the children and young people who are in those situations, and it's given a voice to those experiences. And it's even on the forms so the forms that I complete as a supervising social worker, when I'm recording a visit, there's a section called important conversations. And these important conversations have been taken directly from the survey where the children were asked about what they wanted social workers to speak to them about. And it includes lots of different things. So liking how I look, doing the same things as other children, talking about things that are important to me. And it really prompts you and forces it to be part of your conversation in your practice, although it should be anyway. I think having those as a baseline and kind of a way of starting to have these conversations is helpful. So those are just a couple of the typical ways in which voices are amplified in children's social care. And I mean, as you can see, it can have a direct impact on the way social workers practice, the things that we ask the children and young people that we work with. So all the way from the forms that we fill out to the way we conduct our visits and the training that's offered as well. So definitely can't be understated and really vital for practice, and something that I think we really need to continue to keep working on. I don't think this is kind of a static thing of like, well, we've done this survey. These are the things that the children and young people wanted us to speak about, and that's it. There's always room for improvement and being reflective and seeing what can we do personally, but also as organisations as well, and how we can really embed the voices of kids that have these experiences, really embed it into our practice and into the forms as well that we all have to do. Yeah, that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. That's such a good example. So I was asked to think about this from an adult point of view, like working with adults. And I think I realised when I reflected on the organisations that I've worked in, exactly how Carrie just said, that I don't think we've always done it. I think it's something that we've done a bit of, and then we've maybe not. So actually, it got me thinking within my own organisation, because we're on a journey with this at the moment, of what we've been doing, and I thought it'd be helpful to share with you. And I suppose the thing that I wanted to say is that I think, again, on this session, there'll be lots of people in different parts of their social work journey. So you might be newly qualified, a student, just starting out and getting your head around the social work world, or you might be more experienced or in a leadership or a management role. And actually, we've all got a part to play in this. And it's about starting small and doing something rather than nothing, because we feel overwhelmed. So these are the steps that we've been working through in my organisation at the moment. So the first one is assessing. So this is just about doing a sense check and getting an understanding of where we are at with amplifying the voices of people with lived experience and how we're doing it. And again, for some of you, it might be that you're absolutely smashing this, and that's amazing. Please share that. We were all in this together. For some people, it might be a little bit. I think in my organisation, we probably sit in that. We do a little bit. We could do a lot more. And for other people, it might be absolutely nothing. And there's no judgments here. It's just about understanding where you're at, so that you can move forward and start thinking about what needs to happen. And then secondly, it's thinking about your direct work. And Carrie said this, and it's really interesting. I hadn't seen the Kira or Carrie's video, but actually I completely agree that we need to, and we should, and we have to amplify the voice of people with lived experience in our direct work. So that's how you're writing about people in your assessments, in your care planning, in your risk assessments. What is the tone that you're giving about someone, and is it really genuine and authentic to them and really represents them in a way that if they read their record, they would really resonate with that? And are their views and their wishes and their feelings and their thoughts there, including their support networks, their families and their carers? So in our direct work, what are we doing? How are we amplifying that voice? And then also within teams. So, thinking about are people, and again, in my organisation, there's examples of now multidisciplinary teams, like people are involved in that and they come to their meeting, but they've also been involved in thinking about how does that meeting run and what does that look like and what do they want to get out of that meeting, and doing that work with families and carers as well. So thinking about your own practice and thinking about what's happening within your team to amplify the voices of people with lived experience, and that includes people coming in, so interviewing, all of those things as well. It's really important. And that's within everyone's circle of influence. So assessing, doing a sense check, then direct work, thinking about your own practice and your team and what is going on, and then system work as well. So that's your bigger organisation stuff. So again, in my organisation, there's social workers who tend to do quality improvement work when they want to have some change, and it starts off small, it starts off in their team. It's about making change, and then actually what happens is that learning and that best practice is then shared with the rest of the directorate, the rest of the organisation. We all take on board the bits that work for our setting, and that the people who are using our services, and and what they want from it. So again, learning from others and seeing what's going on within your organisation. It might not be happening directly in your area, but it might be a great benefit to you. And then also we've been looking at who can help and who can get involved. So again, we're all in this together. This is absolutely something that we want to do and we want to do more of. So yeah, who can help? And again, within the NHS, lots of NHSs have service user involvement teams, they have quality improvement teams, they have recovery colleges. So there's all these things which tend to be co-produced or have pools of people with lived experience who want to get involved and want to, have a say in how services are run and what's going on. And then more nationally, there's, amazing organisations like Moving social work and changing futures and social care futures and all those things. So just having a look at what's going on, who can help, who is already doing amazing work that we can learn from. So I think for me, it's always amazing to hear absolutely brilliant stuff and to find it so inspiring, but it's also about them bringing it back to what's going on directly, what's happening, doing that sense check, looking at myself, my own practice and what's happening within my team and my area of influence, and then learning from the wider organisation and looking at what's going on. And then, looking at who can help, because we're all very busy people, but this is incredibly important. And, there is expertise everywhere. There's so many amazing co-produced projects already out there that can support as well.
So our next video is a conversation between a few of the forum members, and we're discussing our experiences having voices amplified within social work, whether that was our experiences of our voices being amplified, or how we were able to amplify someone else's voice within social work practice. And I think this goes a long way to showing the importance of the importance and direct effect of the benefits of having the voices amplified in social work.
So, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this conversation as part of the National Advisory Forum led session at Social Work Week 2024. So we'll be having a bit of a conversation on the voice of lived experience in social work practice, hearing from the National Advisory Forum members who've joined us here today for that conversation, who I'll introduce in just a second, just after I introduce myself. So firstly, I'm Jack Harrison. I'm the Participation Officer at Social Work England, and I'm responsible for co-production and the management of the NAF as well. So if I come to you each in turn, and I'll just ask you to introduce yourself and maybe say what to you amplifying the voice of lived experience means. So Angela, if we come to you first.
Yep, so my name's Angela Duggan. I'm a social worker, practice educator consultant in Bradford, adult social care. Amplifying the voice of lived experience is very important, I think. We can't make changes, we can't enable people to reach their outcomes and identify their own outcomes and aspirations without really understanding and listening to their voice and their lived experience.
Thank you, Angela. Gareth, if we come to you next.
Hi, so I'm Gareth. I'm a person with lived experience of physical and mental health pathways in the past, and I'm a member of the National Advisory Forum of Social Work England on that basis. In terms of amplifying the voice of lived experience, it is about ensuring that the smallest voice, the quietest voice is heard and amplified, and that it has an impact, and that the person is listened to, and what they require in terms of service provision is provided for them, or to the best ability of the social work team that they're attached to, and ensuring that amplifying the voice can inform and develop good practice in social work on the ground and in practice in communities across England.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Gareth. Iffy, if we come to you.
Hi, my name is Iffy Walkero. I'm a lived experience member of the National Advisory Forum. I've had a spinal cord injury now for the best part of 15 years, no, 14 years, thereabouts. And to me, amplifying the voice of lived experience means I and people like myself get to have some agency in our care. We get to have a say in how we are served, whether it's by social workers or by any other healthcare professional or any other professional that we might come across. Our voices are important, and if we don't speak up, we don't get things how we want them. So yeah, that's the importance for me.
Thanks for that, Iffy. So if I pose the first question to you, Angela, and whether there's an example you can think of where you have been able to amplify someone's voice, and what the impact of that was, and maybe which skills as a social worker enabled you to do that.
Yeah, so the example that I'm going to share is when I was working with somebody who was an older adult in a care home. She'd lived there for quite a long time and was very settled. And because her finances reduced, she was coming to the local authority to help pay for the care. The assessment was saying that she needed to move because she couldn't afford the top-ups. But in listening to her voice and the voices of those that were involved with her, and really understanding her experience and the factors of her identity and how it impacted on her and the intersections of them factors, I was able to advocate on her behalf. And like Gareth was just saying, that small voice, and use the legislation that we've got and the policies to enable her to remain where she was, where she felt comfortable, that was her choice, that was her wishes, and for the top-ups to be paid by the local authority.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing that, Angela. If we come back over to yourself, Gareth, as someone, as you've said, with lived experience of social work, can you think of a time where you have had your voice amplified, and what was the impact of that?
Yeah, sure.
And then also behind that as well, what did the social worker do to enable you to have that experience?
Okay, so mine was a long time ago. It was actually 27 years ago when I was first diagnosed with osteoarthritis when I lived in London, and I remember going into the hospital and then coming out in calipers and crutches the other side, but with no information, no provision, or nothing. And it was only through my volition that I managed to get in contact with the social work team. And the social worker that was allocated to me was very, very supportive, because I was told basically at the hospital there was no other support or information they could give to me or to support my house at the time. And the social worker that I met up with came, had an informal chat, did an assessment of my needs, did an assessment of the flat I was in at the time. Was able to really hear what I was going through in terms of, one, my physical needs, but also the practical needs in terms of some equipment for the house to help at that point in time. And she really advocated for me, heard my voice, advocated for me. I wasn't in a good place at that time, to be honest, so I needed that extra support. And she kept me informed every stage of the way, and was able to ensure that I got the equipment for the house that I needed, and adaptations for the car that I needed at that point in time. I think if I hadn't have had that, it would have made my life much more difficult at that point in time. The early stages of diagnosis and the early stages of getting through the system. So my voice was definitely amplified. My voice was definitely heard. My voice was definitely acted upon in, I guess you could call it a co-productive way, although it wasn't really a term back then, but working in partnership with a social worker. And there's real essence of caring for me as a person and my needs, and ensuring that the best practice she could adhere to at the time was upheld, and putting me first and my needs first in everything I did, and that gave me great solace in terms of, one, I got what I required at that point in time, and secondly, it gave great power and empowerment to me to have somebody in my at the time to help me out when I needed it the most.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that with us. And I think how real that still is now, and the impact that had and the way it can still be felt now, I think goes a long way to show the impact that it can have despite the number of years that have passed. And yeah, I think that's an example to set for everyone, that you should be aiming to have that impact on people. Thank you for that. Iffy, if you could answer that question as well.
Yeah. As you were talking, Gareth, I just realised we've got some overlap in both examples that we're using. So my first ever experience with a social worker was when I first got diagnosed with a spinal cord injury after a road traffic accident. I'd spent in total 6 months in hospital, and throughout all that time, I wasn't really speaking to a social worker. Obviously, I was in that bubble where everything was handled by all the care staff and the health staff and the therapists, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, that sort of thing. And I wasn't really thinking about what the world outside would be like. So when it started getting close to the time I was getting discharged, we're talking about probably a month before discharge, social worker came in. She introduced herself again, because she'd introduced herself earlier, but I couldn't remember her. I just didn't have that much interaction with her. And basically just started asking questions to get some idea of what I wanted, how I saw myself after getting discharged. There were a lot of things I wasn't aware of. And between her and the other professionals on the unit, I was able to get some idea of what might happen next. And I found out I might need to be discharged into a care home. Now, whether it was because of stereotypes I had in my head or horror stories I'd heard, that was one of the last things I wanted. And all I could think of was I could just get discharged into a care home if I wasn't told about this. So the first thing was I got informed this is an option. How do you feel about it? So that's where I use my voice. Told them that was a big no-no for me. And we began exploring other options, and of all the options that were available, all of them were quite tight and not very likely. But the social worker was able to use her networks and find a housing society, housing agency. Either way, it was housing for people who were in, like, for health reasons, were in the transitionary part of their life, whether it was discharged from hospital, moving between other accommodations. So it was a short lease, but it was something. It meant I had a place to call my own. It meant somewhere I could actually call home after getting discharged from hospital. And because it was designed for people with disabilities in mind, it meant that I had a bit of a softer landing. Stepping out of hospital, I had a care package arranged for me. My first time in care ever, so I was able to do it in a space that was my own, not in a place where I'm sharing with others or with staff that I'm not the only commitments. People were able to zero in on me and give me that person-centered care. And none of that would have been able to happen if not for that social worker and actually speaking to me, finding out what I wanted. Even the care agency had options. I spoke to them myself, or I was given the opportunity to speak to them myself and choose which ones I wanted. And then when I moved house, when I got discharged, she even gave me some spare furniture because the house was absolutely empty, which obviously is above and beyond the call. Not something I would expect from social workers, but it just went to show how much like she actually cared, and she was putting that care into her profession. Yeah, I definitely felt in safe hands, and that was my first step in my new life. Well, with spinal cord injury, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say my life could have looked very different if those first steps were handled any worse than they were.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks for sharing that, Effie. And I think that, like you've said, goes to show the impact that it can have, and that the approach is to enable people to make their own decisions rather than the decision being made for them for whatever reason that might be. And yeah, it's a really good outcome of what happened there. I thought we could maybe reflect on examples where, although we've spoke about some where there was positive outcomes and the outcomes that people were intending to get, whether there's any examples we can reflect on, maybe where the desired outcome wasn't able to be reached, and maybe what any reflections on those might be, or any learning that you took away from it might be. If I could come to you first with that one, Angela.
A long time ago, I think Gareth is going by memory lane, so I'll join him down there. When I worked in children's social care, I was supporting somebody who was moving from residential children's home into independence, but she didn't want to. She was coming up for her 18th birthday. She was very settled. She wanted to go to college and university. She didn't want to move out. So it was a tricky one because the policy said that an adult at 18 couldn't live in a children's home, but she really, really was passionate and wanted to challenge this. So it was a difficult position to be in as a social worker, because you kind of advocating on behalf of the organisation that you're employed by, but I still wanted to give her that voice and support her amplifying that voice. So I suggested that she write a letter to the director, which she did. I wasn't involved. She wrote that letter, which resulted in her actually meeting with the director. Unfortunately, the decision didn't change, because that's how it was, and still is, that an adult can't live in a children's home. But it did empower her to become a social worker herself. She wanted to make changes. I think she was looking at something else for university, but she didn't get the outcome. She couldn't stay. She did have to move, but we supported her with that. But yeah, it empowered her to want to challenge and advocate on the behalf of others, and she's actually become a social worker herself.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Angela. And yeah, I'm sure the support that you gave her through that time and through that process, and as you say, the learning to advocate not for only just yourselves but for others as well, that you set by example, is something that has stayed with her beyond those experiences as well. Gareth, is there an example you have from that as well?
Yeah, so the example is a family example. So it's my late dad had late stage dementia and Alzheimer's during COVID periods. And he was admitted to hospital on a few occasions in that time frame, but primarily was cared for at home, and family members taking rotas to do that. But at one point he was in hospital, and during COVID, obviously nobody was allowed to visit anybody in hospital. So we had to rely on contact through the telephone to the nurses. He didn't have capacity to contact us, and he didn't have capacity for anything else, really. And it came to light that we got a call from a doctor one night saying that he took a turn for the worse. So DNR in place, a do not resuscitate order in place. He said we had never given the right to put in place, and obviously he didn't have the capacity to agree to that himself. So I was able to stall it for a while, got in contact with the social work team at the hospital and went through it with them. and they did their best to get it revoked based on the fact that there had been no discussions. There was no paperwork to show that the discussions had happened with family members, either myself and my sisters. And obviously he had not the capacity himself to be able to agree to DNR. I think what helped it to be overturned concurrently, I had contacted the Secretary of State for Health in Northern Ireland via Twitter, the power of social media, and he was straight on it as well. So I think it was a mix of the social worker being proactive, which is the key element here. I think she had come across some stumbling blocks within the hospital culture, but the two-pronged approach, I guess, ensured that DNR was taken off his records. But it could have been a very, very different outcome overall. So, you know, on his behalf, as he couldn't advocate for himself, I advocated for him through the social worker and through to ensure that was changed. So it was heard, but it shouldn't have happened in the first place. So yeah, that's a different example.
Yeah, no, it certainly shouldn't have, and really appreciate you sharing that example with us. And I think for me, it shows the impact that these types of decisions have not on the people involved, but also the people in their lives and their extended family who have that connection and responsibility with them as well. Yeah, just showing the impact of that.
When it also reflects in the wider context, not just social work, but in the wider realms of health and social care, that if somebody doesn't have family or friends or somebody who can be their voice, then you know there are more problems ahead for them, unfortunately, and that's why having a voice and having voices amplified is so imperative to and core to social work as a profession.
Yeah, agreed. Thanks for those reflections. So, next question. Oh, I'll come back to yourself, Angela. Knowing that you're a practice educator, just wondering what you instill in students to ensure that they place a value on people's voice and on amplifying it as well.
Yeah, we run lots of workshops with students that are on placement with us about the importance of relationships and getting to know a person. We talk about intersectionality and identity, and I said it earlier about, you know, the factors of somebody's identity and how they intersect to really understand the person's experience. So we put a lot of value on that and really hearing what the person's got to say. We have a little saying that we say to students that what matters most when you're listening, and it's finding out what's important to that person to really creatively support plan together with that person, co-produce that support plan. It's you don't own assessments, you don't own the support plan, it's the person's, and it's about what they want to achieve.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for that, Angela. And then to yourselves as well, Iffy and Gareth, knowing that you're both involved in teaching social work in universities, from your perspective, what do you try to ensure is instilled people at this stage of becoming social workers? If I come to you first.
Okay. So for me, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, my introduction to social work as a profession, at least on a first-hand basis, was after I needed a social worker. I wasn't very aware of the profession before that. I'd only moved to the country a couple of years before I had my injury, and everything I'd heard from there were all the stereotypical, you know, the bad reputation that social workers have, and that wasn't the experience I had. That was definitely not the experience I had. And I was very curious that since I had my injuries, I was always very curious why that reputation was in place. Over the years, I would find out why things had happened. People have negative experiences. Not everything goes as well as I was fortunate enough to have them go for me. But it meant for me that there was a bigger stake in making sure that those kind of things don't happen. People have more experiences like what I had, and not the experiences that have informed those stereotypes and that reputation. So yeah, when I think about my involvement with students at university, my mind is on that person-centered care, that the people they're taking care of, the people in their care are not conditions or disabilities or the situations. They're not a case number, that sort of thing. They're people, just like the social worker itself, just like social workers' families and friends. They're we're people, basically. And everything I get involved with is with that in mind. So yeah, we get treated in a correct way.
Agreed. Keep shouting it from the rooftops, Iffy. Yeah, Gareth, same question to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, I'm, as well as others, are in a very privileged place to be experts by experience in university settings, and being part of the journey of preparing future social workers for their practice. And the group I'm involved in, we deliver a number of modules, and we've co-written it with academics, but we lead on SSP1, which is that preparation for placements. And we do the summative informative elements of that, which is kind of role play and feedback on that, and the core reiterations around that person-centered focus, person-centered element. The look at how to embed the education standards and the social work England standards and BASBA and other standards within everything that they do, but also looking at you know, the person as a whole, as if you said, and looking at the individual, not their circumstances as per se, or framing it that way, and looking more at the kind of the social model of social work, that there is a need to improve people's social outcome, and that's the core element of it. But I think being involved in education of future social workers is a real privilege, and I think that they benefit from the lens of lived experience, because you can theorize, you can read about a case report, you can read about a case study, but when you hear about people's journeys in social care pathways from their own voice and their own personal experience, that brings real benefits and nuances to the learning, and really brings it to life, and really embeds the theories and the practice and the legislation and the law behind social care as a profession, social work as a profession, and why it is a profession, why it's a regulated profession, and the need for that. But it's about, at the end of the day, it's about that person-centered focus. It's about doing the best for the individual and understanding that individual, not making any assumptions, but working with them to find their best solution for them to improve their lives, whatever point they're in at that time that they need social workers in their life. And I think that you know, that's one of the real benefits of lived experience in any setting, is giving that focus to and reality check to what people should have and should expect.
Yeah, thanks for that, Gareth. Yeah, a real testament to the importance of having lived experience in social work courses to ensure that mindset and that way of thinking starts early and as early as possible on the journey to becoming a social worker. Yeah, thank you all for your answers to those. I think that's when we will start to wrap up. So I'll just give each of you a final opportunity to, if you have any kind of final thoughts or reflections, just thinking back on some of the topics that we've covered. Yeah, if you've got any final takeaways or reflections, feel free to share them. Iffy, any from yourself?
I'll go with what I usually tell the students at university. Just patience. Yes, patience with people that are in your care and the situations they find themselves in. Patience with the circumstances, the barriers you might come across, the things that might make it difficult. So, you know, help the person in the best way possible, but also patience with yourself as a social worker, having that self-care of understanding that not everything can be within your control. You can only do your best and not more. And like taking downtime, taking whatever steps necessary you need to actually be the best version of yourself you can be, because the best version of yourself is the only person who can give me the best version of care that I need. So yeah, just have patience.
Thank you. Gareth, from yourself?
I think for me, it's about just ensuring that where possible, the voice is really heard and amplified, be it when you meet somebody for the first time, or be it when you're advocating for that individual in other services, or being the voice inside when it goes to panel and budgets are tight and you've got to really push for financial support for that individual. And overarching it is really, looking at everything through your own eyes as well as a professional social worker. Is like, if I was that person, if I was the service user I'm working with, what would I want done? Maybe everyone's life's different, but in terms of generally, how would I want to be treated? What service do I want? And then wider, that not outside of social work itself, but in general services across the piece, that lived experience is brought into service design and service redesign, so that there is a better holistic approach to services provision to everybody, which will make everyone's life easier, especially social workers, working in multidisciplinary teams, other services, that they can get the voice of people they're working for really heard and embedded into practice.
Thanks, Gareth. And finally, from yourself, Angela?
Yeah, I mean, touching on what both Iffy and Gareth has said there about that key human connection, that's something that we talk about in practice education. When we're talking about assessments, is sort of leave the statutory stuff at the side and just bring it out when you need to. But it's just one human talking to another human and really listening and hearing what that person's got to say and what they want out of you being involved. And that's the sort of crux of amplifying their voices. What do they want out of you being involved? And really taking that and giving it its value and validating it and taking that forward.
Thanks for that. Yeah, and thanks for that conversation that we've just had. That's been really enjoyable and fascinating. And if we weren't limited by time, I think we could keep going and going. But to wrap that up there with patience, empathy, and human connection, I think sums it up nicely. So thanks for that, and thanks for watching, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the session.
So it's also very important for us to acknowledge that there are barriers to amplifying the voices of lived experience within social work practice. And if we're not aware of what these barriers are, then it makes it difficult and almost impossible to address those barriers and find ways to get around them. But there are definitely barriers. I'll hand over to Ashley to talk about some of her experiences.
Yeah, I guess you can see some of the barriers there, some of the really obvious things like unconscious bias. Times people can feel very disempowered by the system around them as well, or a perception that nothing will change. I think if we carry on clicking, there's a few more bits on that slide as well for people to read. But I just wanted to share a bit of experience really, because I'm somebody with a lived experience of children's social care, like I shared, but I'm also somebody now that's come into professional spaces, and I have experienced direct, inadvertent discrimination across that journey at times, unfortunately. For me, I see being able to wear both hats as an absolute positive. I think it gives two different perspectives. It gives two different forms of opinion. I think it gives two different ways of thinking about things. But I've been in rooms before where I've been asked why I have a staff badge, or I've been told that raising a safeguarding concern isn't my business, when the first rule of safeguarding is everybody's business. I've definitely experienced barriers to being in spaces and being accepted. So really, that's a barrier of people's opinions and people's bias and people's subconscious bias. That's something I've definitely experienced myself, but that is not the only barrier by any means, shape or form. There's things around time, and hopefully you can all read it there, but often when you invest time in amplifying voices of lived experience, you can save time, you can find interventions sooner. You know, it's important to think about the potential barriers so that we can think about ways to overcome them.
So as much as we acknowledge that there are barriers and difficulties with amplifying the voices of lived experience, the benefits definitely outweigh those by a lot. There's some benefits on the screen. Then just as you have a look at those, I just want to expand a bit on my own experience. I spoke about on the video. I've had positive experiences with social work and having my voice amplified, not just with social work, but with my care and my life in general post-injury. And I'm very happy with where my life is at the moment. I'm quite independent. I manage my own care. I do a lot of traveling, and the list goes on. But none of that would have been possible if my voice wasn't amplified in the way that it was. I wasn't given that chance to, dictate how I wanted my care to look, how I wanted my life to look going forward. And yeah, it's invaluable, the benefits that I've experienced personally in having my voice amplified. And I think from the videos we've seen today and the accounts we've heard, I hope that's quite evident, like that it is very important, and we can all do something to help help amplify those voices within our practice.
And as you can see here, we asked our National Advisory Forum what they think are the best ways to amplify the voices of people with lived experience. There's a few examples there. Be honest, be clear, think of ways you can change systems and processes, have more people with lived experience in roles, have the confidence to challenge colleagues, build trust, don't be afraid. Really, I don't want you to go away from this thinking that amplifying voices is just co-production. It's not. That's one form of amplifying voices. If you're having a conversation with someone about what's important to them in their life, in their care, that's amplifying voices. If you take that voice back and you translate it to how you can improve a service, that's amplifying a voice. If you think about ways that people can be more involved, that's a voice. If somebody gets to fill out a box on their own referral form, that's amplifying a voice. It's about finding as many ways, small and big, to amplify people's lived experience so that it's heard, so that we can learn from it, and so that the conversations can continue.
Hopefully, from what you've taken from this session is that all of us have a personal responsibility to amplify the voices of lived experience in our practice and all areas of work. So not just in visits, in forms and everything to do with that, but also a responsibility to uphold and translate these voices in our systems, organizations and processes, and really making that accessible to the people that we work with and trying to eliminate all the jargon that kind of comes along with that. And just finally, because I know we're right at the end now, if it would be great to hear what you could do following this session to amplify the voices of lived experience in your practice and the kind of things that you might change or the things that you might continue to do, because I think hopefully everyone will have learned something from this. Yeah, chat's open. So if you want to pop a few reflections in there, that would be great. I know we don't have a lot of time left, but again, I think it's really important to work together and try and figure some of these things out. But thank you all so much for coming to the session. We all really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks to everyone who contributed to the session this morning, whether it be the panel members who are here today speaking live, or those who contributed to the development of the session itself, or those who were part of the recordings who couldn't be with us on the day today. We've fit as much as we possibly can into an hour and a half, so hopefully there's something that you've been able to take away from it. And yeah, I can see some of those messages coming through in the chat now about that kind of that call to action and yeah, what people can do after this session, because I think that's as important as what people have heard during that session, to work differently going forward. So do keep sending those through. We'll leave that chat open for just a minute, and I'll leave this on the screen. It's probably been buried now by all those messages, which is great to see. But we did put in a feedback form, and we'd be really grateful for you to fill that out at some stage. You'll also be sent it through the email for thanking you for attending the week. So if you can't get it out of the chat now because of some of those messages going through, yeah, you'll be sent it there as well.
I just wanted to add, I can see a few people asking about how to join the National Advisory Forum. If you look on the Social Work England website and you click through to the National Advisory Forum, they post on there when they're recruiting for people. And like I say, that's exactly how I joined. And they look for people with lived and learned experience. So yeah, keep an eye out on there, because I mean this has been such an amazing experience for me. So yeah, really encourage people to have a look on there and to apply when there's a space open.
I think we have another slide with the hashtags, Jack, as well.
Yep. Yeah, thanks, Ashley. So yeah, if you're on X, formerly known as Twitter, use hashtag Social Work Week 2024
And LinkedIn.
And LinkedIn, and the hashtag Amplify Lived Experience. Yeah, feel free to carry on the conversation there. And yeah, let us know your thoughts and maybe what the impact of this has been, or what your key takeaway from that has been. But yeah, thank you very much for attending. And yeah, have a good rest of Social Work Week. If you manage to get to any of the other sessions, for those where you can't, the recordings will be on YouTube sometime during April, so keep an eye out for those. Thank you.